Caroline Waterfield, who's going to talk about horizon scanning. Welcome, Caroline.
Thanks, Annesley, and thank you for having me. Hopefully, I'm on the screen and you can see me. As Annesley said, I'm Caroline Waterfield. I have the privilege of being the Director for the Development and Employment Directorate at NHS Employers. And part of my role and remit and my team's role and remit is to look at recruitment and supply, as well as a whole raft of activity around staff experience and regulation. And those two things really fit together. You know, we know that we need to attract, recruit, to improve staff experience, and then retain those people helps to advocate and put us in a really good position to attract and recruit more people into the roles that we have. So I'm really delighted to be able to join you here this morning, and I'm delighted to be able to support the work that HPMA do in supporting you as practitioners, particularly those in the recruitment field. And I wanted to kick off by saying, a massive well done and thank you to all of you for everything that you've done over the last 18 months and prior to that. But what a time it's been for the profession as a whole, the people profession as a whole, and particularly those of you who work in the recruitment space. You will have all had more people that you've recruited over the last 18 months to support the pandemic. You've supported returners into your organisation. You've supported people to stay within those organisations. You've leveraged, or your teams have leveraged, support from the community to run vaccination centres, vaccination hubs, and those programmes. And at the same time, I've thought really creatively and differently about how you support the people that you've got on placement, the ones that we're training, and to increase those placements for whether they're people in apprenticeships, people in nursing associate roles, or are soon to be registered professionals. So there's a whole raft of stuff that has been happening, which you will all have felt and experienced over the last 12, 18 months. And it's how do we take some of that into the future in what is quite a different labour market. So thank you and well done. And if there will be stories that we can hear from people, there will be things that people will want to reflect on around things that have worked and things that you think that you could be really helpful going forward. There's a couple of things I wanted to touch on in the time that I've got this morning before we open up to questions in the chat box and a conversation with Anthony. And that's some of the stuff that we've seen in the media around the labour market, but also maybe what your organisations are feeling in terms of the availability of people to recruit from your own local labour market. But then also thinking about a little bit further afield, what's going on in terms of those global markets. And then most importantly, what does that mean for us? What can we do both now and also now to plan for the next few years? So that's sort of the general flow of what I was going to cover in the next 10, 15 minutes or so. So I don't think any of us will have been able to miss a lot of the headlines around availability of people to work in a number of different industries in the last couple of months. And that's different from the labour market forecasts and outlooks that we were hearing through media channels 12 months ago, where I suppose we were being asked as a big public sector organisation to think about how we supported people displaced from employment, made redundant from employment industries, feeling like they'd been diminished overnight. How did we act as a big public service organisation to support local economic recovery? Wind the clock forward 12 months and we're in a position where those media headlines are saying there is a shortage of people, we're really struggling as industry and sectors have opened up. And we're not immune from that in terms of some of the labour and some of the workforce that you'll be trying to recruit. But beneath the headlines is some real detail, which I think is important for us to think about so that we can really make the most of the opportunities that are ahead of us. The labour market is doing some odd things, and it's doing some odd things in regions, in places within regions. And also when you dig beneath some of the headline data, there isn't a shortage of supply for every type of role with every type of skill. So there's something about how do we get creative with that. And there was an Institute of Fiscal Services report out a couple of weeks ago, so the IFS, who talked about the recent recovery and that vacancies were at its strongest in traditionally lower paid occupations. And that's some of the stuff that we've seen our social care colleagues are finding in terms of recruiting care workers, and that NHS colleagues are finding in terms of recruiting into healthcare support worker roles or other support worker roles. So in June 2021, those vacancies in lower paid occupations across industries were 10% higher than pre-pandemic levels. So that's what we're seeing play out in those roles. But in other occupations, those vacancy levels are only just returning to pre-pandemic levels, and in some areas of industry and the labour market, it hasn't returned to pre-pandemic levels, which is basically meaning that around about 64% of unemployed people have got greater competition for the jobs that they're looking for than they did pre-pandemic. So there is a substantial minority who are finding that actually the labour market is theirs and they can command additional pay for the work that they're looking to do, and that may well drive up pay in certain industries and certain roles. But actually for 64% of the people who are currently unemployed in the UK, the competition for jobs that they're going for is higher than pre-pandemic. And for some of those people, there is a significant diminished opportunity for them to find work with the skills that they have, with the work that they did pre-pandemic. And that's the bit where I think actually there's a currently do. How do we find them? How do we touch them about the opportunities that we might have within the sector? Because if they don't know that we're here and that there is a potential for that, for a reskilling, second or even third career for some people, then they may end up moving somewhere else. So there's something about using some of this data to a different effect. Some of the other data that we've seen shows education levels, age and ethnicity are also some of the factors which are impacting on whether people are finding it easier or more difficult to find work in a 2021 labour market. And particularly, there's been a lot of media headline around young people, and particularly thinking about how do we support young people, because through the pandemic, this homogenous group, who are not a homogenous group, are likely to be impacted in an adverse way as industries open back up. And actually what we've seen from some of the work that we do as an organisation with the Prince's Trust, and some of you may work with the Prince's Trust, is actually some of those supply pipelines of young people aren't quite as plentiful as was predicted through labour market data. There are young people who we need to reach, and they are those who are probably furthest away from the labour market and have really struggled with some of their educational attainment to date, and are also potentially from groups with protected characteristics who may also have traditionally found it more difficult to access the labour market. So some of the work that organisations like the Prince's Trust do and their counterparts is really important in accessing some of those young people who are furthest away from the labour market, but we're not seeing young people as a homogenous group finding it difficult in the same way that people over 50 are finding it more difficult to re-enter the labour market. So that might be something that we can have a look at in terms of local labour market data, and think about some of the skills and the reskilling that and I'm hesitant to say the older workforce because it's more like my age group, and I don't feel that old, but 50 plus is looking like some of the data is showing that that's a particular detrimental impact. So all of the data, I suppose, beneath the headlines and beneath the media piece, which we are feeling in the sector, shows and suggests a more granular approach is needed, both to tracking labour market recovery, but to also support those who are most struggling. I suppose my question to myself and our organisation is, how do we help you to work out who those people are, and how do you use the data within your local areas for you to be able to see who they are, and who can you work with as a large anchor organisation, as a large institution within your community, to really leverage the influence and the power that you have within your local communities to access these particular groups of people, and for them to see at the NHS and wider health and social care employment opportunities as an opportunity for them. Their skill sets might be slightly different and there might be an immediate mismatch, So what does that mean in terms of our strategy around our use of work placements, pre-employment programs, apprenticeships, traineeships, the career pathway? What's the offer? So where this might be lower paid roles that we have, or entry level roles, what's the competitive offer in comparison to other sectors, which means that we've got an opportunity for somebody. So they may take have we got a job with prospect, opportunity, ability to develop, all of the things that you all know and practice within your own jobs day in, day out. But for us to really think quite in quite a tailored way about how, if we're going to target particular individuals, particular groups, what does that offer look like? And how do we make sure that the job descriptions and adverts that we're putting out there and the conversations that we're having speak to those groups of people in a much more targeted and tailored way? So what can we do? We as NHS employers can look at some of the national labour market data, and we're starting to do some of that now. And perhaps a really timely conversation with HPMA running the session today to think about how do we collaborate on working on some of this together. But then how do we help you access some of that local place-based data, if that's something that you're not using at the moment? How do you connect with partners across your local place? The emergence and the development of integrated care systems, and how we leverage some of that opportunity for going beyond what we can do as local organisations to be able to think, how do we have more power as a system and an anchor system in some of this? How does it become part of our strategy, both for now and for the next 5 years? And with those two things, both in terms of the data that we have available to us within our local place and the data and the power and the collaboration across an integrated care system, what are some of the places that we might want to invest some of our scarcity of resource and scarcity of funding to be able to grow that workforce of the future? And, you know, it's not lost on me, Anansi, you're chairing today, the work that you've done at Adam Brooks at Cambridge University Hospitals over a 5-6 year period to have a strategic plan to invest in both the community engagement, your local community engagement to support people into nursing associate roles, into nurse degree apprenticeships, alongside international recruitment, alongside the more traditional university approach to training nurses, is now seeing some real impact and effect in changing the profile and the demographic of your nursing workforce coming into Cambridge University Hospitals. That's a deliberate plan. It's a deliberate investment plan. It shows return on investment. And in 5 years' time, you're starting to reap the benefits of that. We've also published a case study for a similar story that's happened up in Hull, in my part of the world, here in Yorkshire, where they've also thought about how do they invest in some of these different strands to recruit people into our workforce, but also have a multiple strand approach to that. You know, it isn't just about the local community engagement. It isn't just about nurse degree apprenticeships. It is about the university programs. It is about international recruitment. And it's supporting people from within the workforce that we have already to progress and develop. So these are not, it's much easier for me to say that in a couple of moments than it is to do, and I fully appreciate that. So there'll be colleagues on the call today who have similar stories of really heavy lifting workforce strategies that you've put in place to support the growth of the clinical workforce. And we need to do more of that, and we need to keep making the case for that, and we need to keep sharing with each other and up to us nationally, so that we can advocate on your behalf that these are the things that we need to be able to invest in. Because with some long-term sustainability, we should start to see growth from that. And then the final part of that jigsaw is about retention. So if we're talking about good work, we're advertising and attracting people to come into a role which offers opportunity to flourish, to develop, to progress, that actually we can deliver on that. And the whole flexibility, predictability of shift pattern agenda really plays into that, in terms of what are people able to do, what are they able to offer, and how do we best support them to remain in our workforce once we've got them into the workforce, to be able to retain them and offer them value, and for them to be able to support with the value they give in terms of the delivery of service back to the people we provide our services for. So I'm going to stop there. There are some comments in the chat box, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Caroline. What fantastic insight into what is such a strange time. And you're absolutely right. We were not complacent, but we absolutely thought we'd be sweeping in to save all these people who've been displaced, and that certainly hasn't been the case for us in Cambridge. I think Claire in the chat box makes an interesting point. She says we need to ask people what they want, what would attract them. Do you think we have been had a culture within the NHS that we've kind of made assumptions and perhaps seen it as a privilege to come and work for us rather than being privileged to get applicants?
Challenge. So I've seen over the last few years some really fantastic community engagement, some like proactive outreach work for some roles, some types of pathway, and that's shown real productivity and real efficiency. I do feel as well that and that part of this is the volume of people that we're trying to recruit is I did this when I worked in recruitment many a year ago. We will place adverts on a jobs board and hope people will come to us. And it's somehow finding the time to be able to do some of that tailored work, which the bespoke work. Who are we trying to attract? How do we speak a different language? How do we meet people where they're at? One of my colleagues was out at a face-to-face recruitment event last week in Southampton, which felt really odd. I've spent most of my time, as you guys will have done, in my little room here in Leeds. But things are starting to open up again, and there are some virtual, recruitment events that have been happening over the last 12 months. But what Debs, my colleague, found when she went to an armed forces recruitment event was that there were 350 people in a room who came and spoke to her and a couple of employers about sort of some of the things that they were looking for as they were leaving their armed forces roles, from not just the NHS, but from other employers as well. So whether you do that in a face-to-face space, whether it's a virtual recruitment event, whether it's your open days, all the things that we've all traditionally done, but it's asking the question, what are you looking for and what can we offer you? And that's labour intensive, that's time intensive, especially when I started the session by saying all of the things that you're being tasked with doing on a day-to-day basis just to keep the doors open.
Absolutely.
So there's something about is there a business case here for saying actually that the return on investment we can gain as an HR profession, as a recruitment function, is worth investing some additional resource in to do some of this stuff differently.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Thank you. And Richard shared that his organisation is really struggling to attract applicants, and they're seeing a real drop off in the volume and also the quality. And I would echo that in Cambridge. And additionally, what we're seeing is people are applying but dropping out during the process, perhaps because they've got multiple sort of applications in or multiple offers of interview at the moment. So it certainly feels more competitive. Do you think the massive impact that COVID has had on education has impacted that in some way? Are we seeing things like deferred university placements, people sort of maybe rethinking their sort of career aspirations? Do you think that's impacting on the choices people are making?
Good question. So for the traditional healthcare courses, so our registered professions in health, we've seen applications to university go up quite significantly across the board. For other types of courses, it's quite varied. And the experience that people have had at university, and you will have seen some of you may have your own experience of this or family members' experience of this, it's not been a great experience for those who've gone to university and found themselves in the pandemic. In terms of Richard's specific question around the struggling to attract applicants, I'd be interested to know, is that higher level roles? Is it the ones that you're looking for degree type qualification or equivalent, or is it the more entry level roles, the ones that you would have I suppose what the sort of the lower in terms of we might have, over the last 6 months, been able to find healthcare support workers to come and work with us, or to people to come and work in our facilities type roles. And we're really struggling now because we've got big employers in our patch who are offering financial incentives to attract people in, and we haven't got that. That is very real. And then this, and in some ways, we can't compete on a multiple £1,000 incentive that a big global firm might be offering people to come and work for them. What we can offer is something that's a little bit more long term, a little bit more around the value you can add. How do we really leverage our offer, and both in terms of the impact you can have on people and our communities by doing some of the work they do with us, and then also what's the career progression opportunity. And I think there's some really good work that we've seen around pathways being created, rotations being developed. It's what's the offer beyond the initial job, and that's going to take a little bit of thinking through, but definitely feels like if we're going to have competitive advantage against other sectors, perhaps if they're paying more, then what's our enhanced offer?
Fantastic, thank you. Marsha makes a good point about reviewing our recruitment processes to make them more accessible and inclusive. I just wondered if you wanted to comment on that from a central perspective.
Yeah, I can, and I think that's I think it plays to the being more proactive, more community focused rather than reactive, and hoping people will come to us. There is a whole set of work that's happening within NHS England and Improvement around diversity, inclusion, recruitment processes, linked to the People Plan action that was published last year around asking organisations to overhaul their recruitment processes to improve on diversity. So from our point of view within NHS Employers, we're supporting the NHSCI people team in how to progress some of that, and showing some of the examples that people are doing, rather than progressing some of that work ourselves. I think that would be particularly helpful for people. But I suppose Marsha's question, do we need to review our recruitment process and make them more? Possibly. I suppose it depends on what your outcomes are and what you're looking to achieve. Because otherwise it becomes a transactional process as opposed to something which is with purpose, which you can track, impact, progress. If you're wanting to recruit from certain parts of your community group a particular protected characteristic, do you have a real issue with your BME diversity and recruitment or not? I suppose it's necessary, and then trying to work out what you're trying to overhaul, and whether or not you're achieving that. Working with local community and housing groups is absolutely, and that's the thing about being an anchor. And that's it about being a big institution within our communities. There are other big institutions in our communities that we have really and can have strong connections with. So local authorities, through to housing, through to some of the big colleges. How do we leverage that influence to be able to reach more people, but also hear what people are saying? Suggest you linking with colleges and churches for wider reach. Absolutely. It's what have you got there in your community that you can utilise, both from a point of view of employment, but also we've seen a lot of organisations look at how they also use that approach to improve people's understanding of health services. So look at it from more of a holistic point of view. So yes, actually, we're looking to recruit in and from an employment perspective, but this is also about how do we teach young people about the importance of sleep when we go and talk to them in schools, because switching off, relaxation, all of those things that will support a young person's mental health, as well as raising the profile of the types of careers and opportunities that you can have by coming and working with us. So really trying to address that wider health and health inequality perspective.
And Liz Bolton-Spates put a comment in there as well around job descriptions, and I think this feeds into that inclusion and sort of accessibility. 20 pages, you need a PhD, a degree, and 10 letters after your name that aren't always necessary? Do you think that is common practice?
I think we can do more, and I think we can do better. We had a session yesterday which NHS Employers ran with the Director Community, our strategic workforce from, and indeed, the jobs platform did with a sponsor and did some work for it, and talked about their experience of seeing our job descriptions through some of the work that they've supported the NHS with through the pandemic in terms of recruiting people into some of the NHS professionals, etc. And we're quite shocked by some of the length of our job descriptions in comparison to what they would see in other sectors. So I think that's sort of enough said on that. Really, I think there is work to do. I understand why they are some of the lengths that they are, but we do need to get better at drilling that down and being really clear about what it is, that the purpose of the job and what we're asking people to do. Inclusivity of language falls into that. And the other point you mentioned before about people dropping out through the process is we're going to have to be quick, and we're going to have to be slick, and we're going to have to be quicker, because people do have multiple applications into multiple places, and we will lose them if we can't mobilise our processes quickly enough. What's in it for me? What sets your organisation apart? Absolutely. What's the offer? What's the offer beyond the job?
Yeah.
But it's all of these things. They're big pieces of work, and I know from talking to colleagues at Cambridge over the years and in other places, there's the thing that's different about us is that the breadth of roles we have, the high volume recruitment, but that almost just gives us a really positive case for saying, actually, if we need to compete differently in this labour market, we're going to have to put some time aside and some resource aside to do some of this differently if we're going to get the people in that we need.
Absolutely. And I mean, my personal experience is the opportunity for transferability of skills. I came in many years ago in a clinical role. I'm in a very different role now, and I'm always grateful for the fact that I've been given that opportunity to grow and develop in the NHS. So yeah, we have a lot to offer, and it's teasing that out and making sure, as we said earlier, that we're matching what people want and need in their careers or their job of that moment. It might not be a career for life thereafter.
Yeah,
Caroline.
No, thank you. And I think just to end by saying, the comments and the questions, thank you for colleagues to posting those in the chat box. The skill and expertise of this community is second to none. And I have absolute, confidence that the ability is there, the passion is there. And between us, through places like this and some of the networks which we would host, and you will have in your own regions as well, is actually how do we learn from each other? How do we take forward some of the innovations in some places and steal it with pride, pinch it with pride, and run with it? Because we haven't got the I suppose the luxury of lots of time to have to do all of this legwork ourselves. So how do we work together to do some of this differently? And I think the ICS model presents a real opportunity with that within local places, as well as some of the regional and national networks to be able to do that. And I've just noticed my colleague Gaina's on the line too. Hello, Gaina. And she's mentioned the work that's happened in East of England with Roger Kleiner and anti-racism. There's all of that type of stuff, which I think is happening in different places. And it's just about making sure that we can join some of those dots and really help you as recruitment leads to be able to move some of this forward. The labour market does feel a bit bleak, but I think we've got a good offer, and therefore the future is rosy and the future is bright. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for ending on such an optimistic note. That's fantastic. And I think just to reiterate, there is stuff coming into the chat box about where you can source other case studies, examples, the anti-racism stuff, the schools engagement programme. So, do use the chat box as well to network. There is some amazing stuff going on. Thank you, Caroline. Absolutely fantastic to have you with us this morning. I don't know whether you'll be staying around for the rest of the session, or whether you've got to get off and revolutionise workforce in centrally. But thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you so much. And I will stay around for a bit, but to the sessions that are following just look really, really interesting. So maybe I can catch up later if I do need to dip out. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely fine. Thank you so much.